This is Brian, screenfiles.com in review. And what I'm looking at today is 2021's Malignant, directed by James Wan. And if you're not aware, this movie was a pretty big flop. In fact, one of the first for James Wan. It came out during COVID, so people weren't going to the theater, though it was also released at the same time on HBO Max, which was the policy. I think his name was Jason Killer, and he decided on a dual release strategy, releasing in the theaters at the same time he released films on HBO Max. This was a stupid idea, and most of the films released via this strategy didn't work. Denis Villeneuve's Dune did. So why he did this confused me at the time, but what I think was happening was that he was trying to build the subscriber base for HBO Max, and he sacrificed Warner Brothers' 2021 theatrical slate to do it. Malignant cost $40 million to produce. It made essentially $35 million at the worldwide box office. How that translates into HBO Max subscriptions, I have no idea. But as I said, this movie is considered by most to be a failure. As I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of James Wan's filmography. I enjoyed Saw. Dead Silence is a guilty pleasure. Though, beyond that, I'm not really into his work. And what I've noticed, though, is that the movies written by Lee Wannell, who was his writing partner for a time, I tend to appreciate more. And when James Wan is the lead writer, I tend to not enjoy them because, to be honest, I don't think he's a particularly good writer. He's not Zack Snyder bad, but he's not that great a writer. Though, if you've watched his movies at all, he has certain stylistic quirks that once you know about them, you can't unsee them. For instance, he has this thing with sets, in that he will have, let's say, a house set, in which the interior is so much larger than the exterior. It makes no sense to me, and I can only attribute it to a stylistic quirk, as I mentioned. But when you see Malignant, you see it on full display. The house that this woman lives in has an interior in the Twilight Zone, which is to say, it is bizarre and it makes no practical sense, especially based upon the outside of the house. When it shows the interior, as some of the pictures I think will make clearer, the ceilings seem inordinately high. I mean, something like 15-foot ceilings. It's insane how tall they are. And if you look at this house from the outside, it clearly does not look that spacious. And I would argue it is not that spacious because the house on the interior is a set. The house on the outside is an actual house, as far as I can see. As I said, he does this a lot in his movies, and this is the first movie I really grasped him doing it. And it is an irritating, vexing issue because it creates an almost Funhouse environment that this woman, played by Annabelle Wallis, lives in. It's frustrating because the movie asks you to accept this weird, warped environment that this woman lives in as reality. And it clearly is not. It is, as I said, a soundstage. Now, if the movie existed in a context where such weirdness were the norm, that would be different. But that's not the case with this movie. The movie introduces some very bizarre elements, but her house isn't supposed to be one of them. It's supposed to be simply a house. It's asking us to continually accept things on faith. And it gives nothing in return, which is, for me, very frustrating. In any case, the story of Malignant is the story of Madison Mitchell, once again, Annabelle Willis, who is having these blackouts. And when she does, she's able to see this person called Gabriel kill people. She doesn't know why this is happening, though it never happened before she got into an argument with her husband that somehow began to revolve around her pregnancy. And each pregnancy, it implies there are multiples, but it doesn't say how many, was miscarried. So this time she's really hoping that she can have this child. So her husband, for reasons, kind of uses her pregnancy and her miscarriages to attack her vocally, and then he does it physically by pushing her and her head hitting the wall. Now, she doesn't make a connection between this event and Gabriel, but after this happened is when she begins to have these visions of Gabriel killing people. The Gabriel subplot and the connection to Madison are the main story Malignant is telling. But the thing is, Gabriel's story is ridiculous. And keep in mind something, I watch a lot of movies, and a lot of them are ridiculous. But as I said, James Wan only gives you ridiculous upon ridiculous upon ridiculous. And there's nothing real in this movie. The characters are underwritten, the sets are bizarre, Gabriel is just weird. Okay, let's spoil this a little bit. During pregnancy, Gabriel and Madison were brother and sister, though the egg was fertilized, divided, but never really split. So they became interconnected individuals, almost like Siamese twins in a way, except that Gabriel was a parasite on her back. This is where the ridiculous part comes in. Gabriel was fully functional. When these type of things tend to happen to this degree, one of them is just not viable. Because as I mentioned earlier, that's like a Siamese twin in principle, but it's really not. One of them should not have been viable at all. But in this case, you have Madison, her brain fully developed, as well as her body, and Gabriel, his brain fully developed, though his body was very vestigial. It looked like a little Tyrannosaurus. In any case, what the doctors decided to do was to remove Gabriel from Madison. Now here's where it gets stupid. Apparently it's not like they're sharing a brain. They have two brains. There are two different individuals here, attached via the back and the head. This is ridiculous because if there were two intact individuals, I'm not understanding why they couldn't have been separated. Because they are seemingly both viable. In any case, never mind this ridiculous Siamese parasite plot. Gabriel also has electrical powers. He's fucking Electro, for Christ's sakes. Yet somehow they enable him to open a refrigerator door, which is not electric, by the way. He seems to have the ability to do things that, never mind being Electro, he should not be able to do. He seems to have the ability to blend with shadows. He has all sorts of powers and abilities. As I mentioned, and keep mentioning, and will probably continue to mention, the movie keeps asking us to accept the ludicrousness of its premise, but gives us nothing in return. So, I'm not liking this movie. It is certainly watchable. Oh, I forgot to mention. Also, Gabriel is a fucking ninja. He literally has physical abilities beyond those of Madison. Now keep in mind, the body is Madison's. Yet somehow Gabriel has more use of it, has more control of it than Madison, the person who literally used it for, I want to say, 2 decades? It makes no sense. Nothing about this movie makes any sense. He is not bulletproof, but bullets don't seem to affect him. And he seems to dodge them half the time anyway. It is ridiculous. He is captured at, well, I should say, Madison is captured at one point, and she just loses her shit and slaughters a whole cell full of prisoners, as well as virtually every cop in this particular police station. A police station which was also as weirdly designed as Madison's house. Extremely roomy. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time in police stations. I think I've seen maybe one. But I've never seen a police station like this, ever. And I think a police station like this does not exist on this planet. It is ridiculously roomy. The cell is just massive. It is the reoccurrence of that weird quirk of James Wan's I mentioned earlier. But it takes you out of the movie every time he does it. And I think I understand why he does it. It's to give room for the cameras and the dolly tracks and choreography. But it's a cheating way to do it. Make the room relatively normal size, or at least shoot it so that it appears normal size. Not these vaulted chambers that would be better suited for a cathedral. Gabriel's modus operandi is to kill the doctors that separated him from Madison and eventually kill his mother. The concept is interesting. But as I said, James Wan, as a director, doesn't give enough. The characters are very shallowly written. It's bizarrely production designed. It's just an odd movie. And it's also extremely violent. As I mentioned earlier, Gabriel is on Madison's back. She is essentially dormant when he is acting. The problem with this is that her body seems to change to adapt to Gabriel. Though, you never see her legs when this happens. You always see her hands and arms and upper body, but you never see her legs or her feet. Why is that? Because it's bad enough that Gabriel somehow manages to magically change the position of his arms so that they work in a manner that's effective. Because I can't speak for you, but putting my hands behind my back and doing things as if I were moving forward is really difficult. Though I mentioned legs earlier. That's because if you've ever tried walking, running, and doing various things backwards, the body doesn't respond the same way as it does forwards. Which is to say, it would not look at all the same. The only way that they could do that was have the person playing Gabriel facing forward. Otherwise, he would move in such a bizarre manner, and it would not nearly be as graceful and as quick as Gabriel moved. This movie is frustrating. And what's even more frustrating is that the ending is lifted directly from A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Master. It is violent, but in a very ineffectual manner. There's more blood spilled in this movie than in many movies that I have seen. But nothing means anything. The characters are cutouts. The dialogue rings hollow at the best of times. So nothing means anything. There are no real stakes. Things are just happening on screen. You take it in and you shrug and move on. It is not in the least a memorable movie. Though there are moments of interest. Not enough for a movie that lasts almost 2 hours. But occasionally there are things that are interesting. And Included in those interesting things would be the theme music by Joseph Basura, who's done quite a few movies with James Wan. It gets a little kind of new wavy as opposed to more orchestral, but it's still good music. In fact, I think the music does a lot of the heavy lifting of this movie. A lot of people don't seem to understand why Malignant failed, and some will blame COVID, some will blame HBO Max. Though people need to blame James Wan because Malignant is not a very good movie. It has interesting moments, but as I said, when your movie lasts almost 2 hours, you need a little bit more than interesting moments. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow.